and it should never be forgotten what they sacrificed, and the conditions must have been, well, I went down a deep face coal mine and it was horrendous.
Could you talk about the conditions a little bit?
Yeah, for me, my dad organised it at the Ollerton Colliery, Ollerton Pit. We don't call them collieries, we call them pits. That's the language. And it was on a Sunday morning. My mum, my sister-in-law, and it was all women. I think there must have been about 15. And my dad as a deputy, and also he worked for the Miners' Rescue. And so we went down the big shaft. My ears popped, I remember that. And it was this colour. It was this colour down. It was like a huge tunnel with trains going through. And all I saw was this colour when it comes down.
It's been whitewashed. It's been
Whitewashed. And then we went down along with the trains. And I think we went on a train. Yeah, and then we got off, and then we were in a space that high, and it was all black. And my dad crawled through all of us, and I was at the back, and he moved a chalk, and they called us roof support. And I was at the back, and by the time he moved it, I was at the front. I couldn't stand the claustrophobic. It was so black. And we got out, then we walked along where they were turning the coal, washing it. And this is because I didn't know and when we got out, I was so pleased to get out. And we were black all over. And we couldn't have showers, we had to go home like that. But it was an amazing experience.
You've got Nottinghamshire that had really good seams of coal. So even though Joe said she went on the coal face, they're quite high compared to such as Derbyshire and Yorkshire's coal seams, because their coal seams weren't as they were good coal seams, but they weren't as thick. So you're talking at that time, probably Nottinghamshire, their coal seams were twice as thick, so it wouldn't have been as claustrophobic as Derbyshire or even Yorkshire. It didn't help from where we are. What I've just explained is that there's 8 or so mines, collieries, which are very close to each other, but we're in different areas. You've been into Worksop, you've got Manton, you've got Shire Oaks, and Stevenage close now, I think, but Shire Oaks, and they're Yorkshire, and they're only a matter of 2, 3, 4 miles apart. That's what probably made this area a little bit different, probably to the other areas. You've got working miners, the working collieries, Nottinghamshire. You've got Derbyshire mines that voted not to go on strike but were forced out, and then you've got the Yorkshire miners that were literally picketing everywhere, and that's how it threats with picketing, and there was a fair amount of trouble, violence. We were lucky; we got help from
people were just putting money through the door, and we didn't know. And the only and the association, Ian did some work for a dear friend of mine.
Rightly or wrongly, probably shouldn't have done that.
But Ian decorated.
It was some decorating work.
And there were blacksmiths, and they bought us a ton of coal. It was the cold what got to you. You did, because you relied on coal for heating the house. No, and I remember going to the co-op, and we had 2 boys, 1 4 and 1 5, and I was going to the co-op, and they asked for sweets, and I said, oh no, no sweets today. And a neighbour just brought me, she was there, she brought me a bag of sweets. She must have heard that the money, you spent it on food, but same with children's clothes, you know, there was always something. We went to Mansfield shopping, and somebody came out and said, somebody's just given me £100, you have it. And it's, so there was, but also there was division with the people within the union. And you can
They were
see
militant.
so militant.
I think that's a personality thing, isn't it? There was militant.
Could you talk a little bit, are there stories that you could share related to what was going on with mining and the strike when he was a policeman?
Yeah, it's because Nottinghamshire never voted to come out. They were totally anti-Scargill. And so they were kind of saying, don't you tell us what we're going to do. So Dad was a deputy in the mine. My brother was a Nottinghamshire policeman, so he was on the picket lines all the time. Then Ian was on strike, so the dimension and also the different attitudes, it could have imploded. But everybody respected their opinion and we all helped each other. There was no, Ian never resented my dad going back with not striking. My brother had that going on the picket lines, and they were, you know, some of the police officers were vicious. And so, but when it came into the home for my mum and dad, we never experienced that division.
So what is your personal connection to the community?
So if I start from the beginning, my grandfather was a miner. My dad was a miner before he changed roles. My in-laws were all miners. My wife is the daughter of a miner. And all my mates were miners at the time. So I was certainly growing up and living within the mining community. I at the time was working in the building trade, so I booked the trend and didn't go down the mines, I went into the building trade. So I was working locally from Worksop, but my work took me all over the north of the county. So we did work in Retford, in the rural suburbs of Retford, we went up to Harworth, we went up to Doncaster, we went out into South Yorkshire, the other side, off towards Sheffield, the Trent Valley, down as far as Mansfield, Southwell. So we did all of the communities, we worked in all of the communities of North Nottinghamshire and its environment locally. The year, it was 83, wasn't it, the miners' strike started in 83, I think. Is that right?
84.
84. So in 84, we were married in the June. So we were planning a wedding and doing a property up from 83. So when we had the pickets down, the South Yorkshire pickets predominantly and from beyond, to picket the local miners, so in the village that I bought my first house in, which was Ollerton, the majority of the Ollerton miners worked. And I didn't understand the politics at that time as to why they chose to work and why the miners were out on strike, because that wasn't, it was part of my world, but it wasn't my world. Yeah, so I was working all over the county, doing a house up in Ollerton whilst I was in the building trade, and saw it from my work perspective, driving around the county to go to work in a works van with 2 or 3 other lads. We were often stopped by the police at checkpoints, but fortunately we were in a liveried van, so where are you going to? We're going to work, we're working, we've got the work stuff in the back, it's quite clear. But we were always being stopped by road checks. There were various factions of the police. There were local police who lived local and worked local and knew local people. So when I came across those, it was always stop, a check, and that was quite amenable. There was some abrasiveness at times when police from other areas were doing those checks who weren't connected to the community, they were just doing a job. and that shone through. That was quite evident. But I didn't get turned around. Usually they listened to me and just allowed me through.
And did you interact with any of the flying picketers?
No, not really. I remember one night we'd been to visit a relative and we drove down what's called Forest Road at Orton, and that would have been about 9:30. And the pickets were there in numbers, significant numbers. It was like being at a football match, the shouting and the jeering, as miners did cross the picket line and go to work. There were police about. It was quite unnerving, but it happened. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think what I've seen, what I can sort of talk about is when the mines closed, and Orton closed in 1994, 93, 94, I think it was. 93, 94 or thereabouts. I've still got friends that worked at the pit. My brother-in-law, by then, he was still working at the pit, he was an electrician. He ended up moving pits. I think he went to Cotgrave first and worked at Cotgrave pit, which is Nottingham side. But others, they went off and chose different careers, different jobs. They had to. The pits were going. There wasn't the room for everybody to be employed everywhere else. So those that chose it left and found other work. One of my best mates, he did some work for a gas fitter, a company fitting gas fires, and he ended up learning the trade of a plumber, a gas fitter. They set him on, he did night school and he became a gas fitter and did the rest of his career, if you will, as a plumber, as a gas fitter, fitting gas central heating, that kind of thing. Another guy, he went off to work for a local factory, did a couple of jobs at local factories, and he dotted around and did all manner of things, but no particular trade. So it must have been quite difficult for them. It must have been quite difficult. Yeah, I mean, all the mining villages were built around the mine. So my son lives in an ex-pit house that was built when Orton was sunk, about 1923, 26, or that period. So it's about 100 years old. And the bricks that have been utilised in the building of it are Welbeck bricks, because each colliery had their own sort of brick manufacture because they needed bricks in numbers. So they have brickworks. And many Orton houses are built of Welbeck bricks because that was an established brickworks, and they're all stamped with the word Welbeck, which I find quite interesting.
Why did the collieries have brick houses? What?
Brick houses?
Brick manufacturing.
Because they needed so many bricks. They needed bricks locally. So there's a brickworks at Curtin that produced bricks. I don't know where the Welbeck side would have been, but bricks were produced for pits because they needed bricks in numbers. They were building a village. They weren't just building a house or a housing estate, they were building a village.
And I'm wondering, they used the bricks in the pits to build the arches and the tunnels for the miners to get through?
Well, the tunnels underground don't have brick arches, but certainly the brick buildings and the brick structures above ground are permanently brick. I watched a programme only last week or the week before about Clipston headstocks. Have you been to Clipston and seen the headstocks at Clipston? You can actually visit those on a Friday, I think. And I didn't realise that they were clad in brick after they were built. So the headstocks were all built and then they were clad in brick. So the brickwork on the outside is not the original building. That's been clad afterwards. But yeah, thousands and thousands and thousands of bricks it must have been.